Welcome back. I am your host. I am attorney Stephen Leahy. And today we have a new gang because we have George and Jimmy. Jimmy's part of the old gang.
I'm old.
Hi.
I'm part of the old crew. George, you're part of our crew.
I've done your show live on Sundays a couple times.
You've done it a couple of
And
times.
that's
You know
the
what?
big
You're
show,
part of
yes.
the crew. When
That's true.
when we usually do our show with Debbie, we say crew, but you're there in spirit.
I think I'm probably two of Debbie, actually.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you that I had a client come in this week, and they had listened to the show last week.
Did they really?
And remember last week because I mentioned that I mentioned the book because it's always in the introduction, and I hadn't mentioned it in such a long time that I am an author of a book.
What book is that?
Solve Your IRS Problem Today.
So nice of you to ask, Jim.
Sounds awesome.
It is. But anyway, I mentioned it last week, and then I had a client come and say, "Yeah, I heard you talk about your book. Can I get a copy of your book?" And I gave him a copy.
How do you get a copy?
What do you mean?
How can you get a copy of
You
your
could
book?
call
What do
me.
you mean? What do I mean? How do you get a copy of your
You
book?
can call me at 312-664-6649, and I'll give you a copy of my book. And now I will place you on our new newsletter because I have a new newsletter. It's really nice. It's a real newsletter, but
Is it fake news?
No, but some of it is. It's fake news. But it's a paper version, but I also have an email version, so I can put you on an email so if you want to get on our mailing list, give us a call, 312-664-6649. This is a different studio, so it's
We got
people walking on.
It's the George Hoffman experience.
People are walking between us, Georgia. I'm
Yes.
looking at George.
We're separated by a hallway and a couple of soundproof pieces of glass.
It's awesome.
And again, people keep walking past. It's like, hey,
Everybody's waving at you like, "Hey, how are you?"
Don't worry, don't worry about us. We're just doing a radio show.
Well, without further ado, this is the blog segment. It's the blog segment. The blog. The blog. Well, Attorney Leahy, what are we going to be talking about this week in the blog segment?
Well,
We already did a teaser, I know, but for those who are just tuning in right now.
I'm going to talk about the 6 things you can do if you owe the IRS money. And this is what the guy that was just talking about the book. That's why I had to go through him. Because when I sit down with people and I explain them how this whole process works, I talk about the 6 things you can do if you owe the IRS money. And here's another one. I met with an IRS agent yesterday. I had never had one come to my office, but I had a client that I helped some years ago.
So you just assumed IRS agents are like toll booth attendants. They're just not real people. They're just a figure of your imagination. You ever met anybody who works in a toll booth?
I have.
Have you really?
One of my best friends.
Really?
He's not a real person. You're right. He is a fictional character in every way.
So anyway, I had this IRS revenue officer come by my office yesterday, and she turned out to be a really nice woman. And I told her about the IRS radio hour, and she was, "I'm going to listen to that show." I said, "Well, you should. You're an IRS person." She said, "Is it pro or con?" I said, "Well, sometimes it's not too pro IRS. I'm not a big IRS fan. Often."
Well, shout out to that IRS
agent. I'm not going to say who she is. But anyway, what I was getting at is that there's 6 things. So the first thing you could do, you could pay them. They say you owe some money and you pay them. So I was just telling you, she was there to pick up a check from one of my clients because a couple years ago we got him into a payment plan where it was a partial installment. He was just paying what he could. And now he came into some money and he wanted to just pay it off. So it was a sizable amount of money. And I don't think I ever gave a check to the IRS that big before. But she came and he said, "Is this going to solve it?" Yes. If you pay the IRS everything they say you owe them, that will solve your problem. I guarantee it. So that's one. That's the first thing you can do. The second thing you can do is come up with an installment agreement. A couple different types of installment agreements. You can do a full pay where you just come up and say, well, if I owe less than $50,000, I can try to divide that by 72 months, and the IRS might take that. We work to get them to take that as a payment plan.
Carry the 3.
Yeah, and they won't look at your income and your expenses. They won't drag you through the ringer, which is what they usually want to do, I should say. And they changed the rules some years ago that it's $50,000. But sometimes you can do what they call a partial installment agreement. And a partial installment agreement is when I can prove how much I could pay them. Let's say it's $200. Let's say I owe the IRS $200,000, and I can prove all I could pay you now is $200 a month. Well, the IRS will take the $200 a month and they'll leave you alone. And they won't freeze your bank accounts. They won't come out by your house. They won't garnish your wages, and they'll leave you alone on a partial installment agreement. So that's what a lot of people don't understand and that's why they get afraid of the IRS, because they don't understand that we can get them into a program where they could just pay what they can. So don't look what you owe, just pay what you can. The third thing you can do is do an offer and compromise, and we've talked a lot about an offer and compromise on the show. An offer is not really where you say, hey, will you take 1,000? Will you take 5,000? Will you take? It's a calculation. And again, it's based on what your disposable income is. So that's why the real negotiation with the IRS involves negotiating what are your reasonable and necessary expenses. Because we know what your income is. If they don't allow you your expenses, well, then your disposable income seems to be really high. So the big part, again, about negotiating with the IRS is fighting for your reasonable and necessary expenses. And then there's a calculation to come in about what an offer and compromise is.
What if I own a business and then I say that reasonable and necessary expenses are ad revenue?
Well, I think that could be a reasonable expense.
So there we are, ladies. So there are options available for you if you fall into that category.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true.
Don't forget that.
And the fourth thing you can do is you can get declared currently not collectible. And what this is I can prove to the IRS that given what your income is and your expenses, you don't have any money left at the end of the month to pay the IRS. And this is where people don't understand. If I can prove that to the IRS, they'll leave you alone. And I've had people in currently not collectible status. I had a guy who owed almost $1 million, and we put him in currently not collectible status. He lost his business. And there was these were all payroll taxes, so they couldn't be discharged in bankruptcy. They had a lien on his house, and we put him in currently not collectible status for 5 years. And then after the 5 years, there's a statute of limitations. People don't understand that, and so his debt to the IRS disappeared. And then the lien was removed. Then he could sell his house, and he got some equity. He didn't have a lot of equity, but he got some equity out of his house.
So it's a sharp stick in the eye.
No matter what you owe the IRS, if I could prove to them that you don't have any disposable income at the end of the month, well, then they'll leave you alone, and they won't take anything away from you. Now, might be a couple of years later, they'll come back and say, hey, can you pay us now? Are you making more money? And, of course, the IRS always knows when you're making more money because you have to report it to them every year, right? You do a tax return. So they know when you're making more money. So if you start making 20% more, they're likely to come after you and ask you, hey, can you pay more now? Would that work for you? Now, the fifth thing you can do is you can file for protection under the bankruptcy laws. Now, all taxes aren't dischargeable in bankruptcy. It's a complicated area of the law. It's where I work, so I'm very good at this. Sometimes you use the IRS.
He's not tooting his own horn either.
What I tell people is sometimes the only more powerful organization than the IRS is the federal court system. And that involves the bankruptcy courts because those are federal courts. And so the IRS does listen to the federal court system. They don't seem to listen to anybody else, Jim, but they do listen to the federal court system. So I have a revenue officer who will not remove a levy from my client. He says, no, I will not remove that levy. Well, I can go file for protection under the bankruptcy laws, and as soon as we file, the levy has to be released by law. And so that's one way to overpower some of these revenue officers. And then the sixth thing you can do if you owe the IRS money,
what is it?
And this is what you're probably doing if you're watching the show and you haven't tried to address it, is you can do nothing, right? And let the IRS do whatever they're going to do. It takes them some time. They're like a battleship. It might take them a year, baby. I'm under the radar screen. They don't know I'm here. They know you're there. They just haven't gotten to you yet. They will get to you. And once they get their battleship turned around and their guns pointed to you, they'll let you have it, and they won't stop. So you can do nothing, but it's not a good choice.
That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Remember, Open Tax Resolution is there for you. They are there to help you get back on track to financial success. Get out of the IRS, get the battleship's gun sights. Get out of there. And that's what Attorney Leahy does. There's nothing better than having a lawyer on your side. So remember, 312-664 6649 or visit chicagotaxteam.com. That's going to be your hub to help fight the IRS. You can get a copy of the 6 things you can do if you are in IRS trouble, and you can also get in contact with attorney Stephen Leahy. Now, ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned because after the commercial break, more IRS Radio Hour is coming your way here on AM 560, The Answer.